Sigoli Nadioliwis, Skanagoga, Skanago. I just said in Oneida, greetings, what is the news? Are you with peace? I am with peace. It is me, Dr. Thomas T.J. Reed, Oneida name Laguadio, which means he is a good man, and I'm so grateful to be with you today here in this digital circle, this digital community. Our centerpiece that we have, some gifts and some things that were sent from my grandma, Eleanor Bailey, made her name Cornelius in Oneida, Wisconsin. Some Oneida grown tobacco to make requests, to ask for guidance, and then also to give thanks. And then this Oneida grown sage is to ward off negativity as well too. So I'm putting these in our centerpiece here, these things that bring us together. Just want to say Yawonko, thank you for you. It's been such an honor to learn alongside you this semester so far. This is week 6, and time flies when you're having fun. And I've been really enjoying learning from each and every one of you and all your different responses. It's just always such an honor to be in this position to learn from each and every one of you. So thank you very much. Welcome to Module 6, Week 6. Let's keep it going, people. Here we go. So from your chapter in 7 and 8, Navajo Nation as Peacemaking reading, one of the takeaways in chapter 7 is this notion of I am his brother. And one of the takeaway, this passage from page 133, one of the goals of the Yada Ya, which means upward bound in Dene, was to use traditional ceremonies to bring the young clients back to harmony when the peacemaker felt this approach was warranted. So this is notion for having traditional ways where there's just these different ceremonies, these different things to bring people back, where I use lacrosse as this tool, I use talking circles and using an eagle feather as a talking piece, and just doing these things in these traditional ways, whether it's singing and language or dancing, but just having these ideas to try to bring back ceremony as a form of healing, just as a way of creative ways for bringing to heal people into different indigenous communities, going back to a millennia of practice, thousands of years of different practice within different communities, and putting together the back of those pieces to do that practice now or continuing on that tradition. Chapter 8, when talked about Navajo Nation courts and peacemaking, from page 152, says Native Americans are justifiably afraid that dominant society will continue to impose social institutions on them that are not in their best interests. Although legal pluralism is an undeniable fact in the United States, mainstream American society is not known for its tolerance or respect for difference. One of the underlying issues that must be acknowledged is the possible threat to the peacemaking that could come from a perceived lack of legitimacy. And indeed, I think that oftentimes people, even now in their current Western United States system, can sometimes brush off restorative justice. Oh, that's whatever that is. That seems so idealistic. That just seems like that doesn't happen. And I would definitely encourage you to read the text by Danielle Sared, Until We Reckon, recognizing that our current legal system in the United States has brought us to where we are today. And if we want to go somewhere else and do something different, then we need to change that system. And or we will, unless we do systemic change, we will continue to have the same results we've been having. So that notion of legal pluralism, whose sovereignty? Is this the tribal sovereignty? Is this the state? Is this the federal sovereignty? At what level is whose laws are being applied? Page 153, sharing strategies and ideas can only make them all stronger. And I love that notion of best practices. And during my dissertation, we'll talk about later, I worked with 12 other Oneida College Lacrosse co-collaborators. And we talked about, well, one of the best ways for sharing our traditional ways, one of the best ways for preserving our traditional ways is by sharing that as well too, which I find so fascinating. One of the best ways to hold on to something is by sharing that notion with others, people as well too. Just like I'm doing with you all right now as well too. So we talk about restorative justice in different domestic violence cases. It can be used for different things. I've heard different lawyers talk about these notions of when restorative justice can be used, and they're saying basically people want to know if it could be used for murder, be used for different things, and restorative justice as a system. And they're saying, well, as long as people are willing to have accountability, as long as people are willing to voluntarily go through the process, then that can be a system that can try to move forward with that. And me and myself as a practitioner, when I'm doing different cases, and I let people know we have our other systems in place, but if we want to try to do this community peace, making this restorative justice, unless everybody is, unless we have consensus, unless everybody is, if everybody does not agree with what's going on, then we can go back to our other systems that we have in place. Just a reminder, those other systems in place they're not designed for healing. They are not designed. They're very much adversarial. They're not designed to help create harmony in our community as well too. Just remember that even after that, maybe there's money there. Once the money dries up, that the pain and the healing still needs to happen anyways within that community. So in these cases of restorative justice and domestic violence cases, just acknowledging the emotional harm that occurs as well. Less of a focus on coercion, more of a focus on healing. So when trying to get people to do these, again, if it's coerced or if it's not voluntary in different courses, then more damage can be caused. sometimes rage or lack of accountability would definitely be major hindrances. This notion of rage, of not being able to see rationally, lack of accountability. Again, if people don't take accountability at whatever levels, from smallest to largest, then the system just falls apart. Then it will not work. And one of the notions that talked about in some of our readings was this notion of shuttle diplomacy, which I'm a big fan of shuttle diplomacy. So for instance, let's think about like in a family court situation, if there's a custody issue, if you might have two parties who are not able to have congenial and not able to have loving conversations between one another, perhaps you can do a shuttle diplomacy where you have perhaps it's their grandparents or different people of the different parties who are able to have more cordial conversations, and then they're able to have those different. They're able to be like transporting the. If it's child custody, if there's moving child from one case to another, just one example, or shuttle diplomacy, if two parties are just not at a place where they're willing or able to talk to each other, that you have a restorative, a community peacemaker, a restorative justice facilitator, being able to pass along the messages from one people to another if they're not able to be in the same room at one way. So maybe it doesn't look like sitting in a circle at one time, but it's still a movement I feel like towards restoration, right? Are we at any time you have a spectrum? Is this happening? Is this more punitive, or is this happening more restorative to build up again? So that's just some different options there. Again, some of your readings you were looking at was my dissertation with my co-collaborators as well, titled Oneida College Lacrosse Players: Perspectives of the Sacred Game of Lacrosse. So my great grandfather used to play as well too. When he was forced to attend Carlisle Indian School, where he ran away twice, this was a way that he was able to hold on to his traditional ways in plain sight, so to speak. And it's still a way that I love to play every single day. Love the game. Every game being played here, there's a game being played in the spirit world as well too. And our wooden lacrosse stick is a conduit, like an antenna to the spirit world as well too. So, and when Oneida men, when we die, we're believed to be buried with our lacrosse stick, which I plan on doing. As you're not done with it yet, you're still playing on the other side. So that's why one of the reasons why I practice every day. I look forward to that day as well too someday. So let us continue. During my data collection procedures, when I was carrying out these circles, this was one option for digital talking circles. And of course, being in person, of course, is so much more idealistic and so much more better. If you can remember watching this historically with the timeline of events, this was happening right at the occurrence of the COVID-19 pandemic as quarantine was happening. So as opposed to bringing everyone together, we had these Zoom monthly talking circles with specific prompts aligned with the medicine wheel. So we'd be looking at these questions on a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. How do we hold on to our traditional values? How do we share those? And what do we recommend going forward as well too? One of these notions that's been talked about, Cape Pranis, and it's something I've experienced firsthand as well too, that before you go into a circle, that 30 minutes before each circle is very imperative. What energy are you taking in? What is your mindset you're going in? I'm told that we cannot step in the same river twice, and that the river's changing. And I would say for circles that we're changing, that we are not the same person, perhaps, that we might be, whatever the circumstances may be. Just recognizing that the 30 minutes before your circle is very important. So for us, we have played either spent time with the lacrosse sticks, playing wall ball where you're practicing playing lacrosse by yourself, whatever that was, that we took that intentional time to do this traditional practice for 30 minutes before our circles where we came together. We also had Instagram weekly talking circles, so just on a digital, either a text and sometimes for voice memos as well too. And then I also took personal journal weekly reflections to recognize that data as well too. And as we talked about our centerpieces there, here they are right here, of that tobacco and that sage is what we sent out to all the different co-collaborators. My grandma helped me put it together, have a wooden lacrosse stick. This one has been is in need of having some more wooden glue, but I still have that wooden lacrosse stick that's often with me wherever I go as well too, as some medicine. So I had some different co-collaborators that, oh yeah, I have your stick. It's my medicine. I put it over on my hanging from my rear view mirror for my car, different things, just having that notion of the medicine game. So let us continue on. So just in general, so that was one great example of circles of us problem solving and coming together, holding onto our traditional ways, and highly recommend using this model and having it culturally aligned in your own communities. Definitely recommend that. You can look through my paper for more, that dissertation, for more ideas or takeaways and findings in that regard. And again, I've talked about this before, but I want to bring it up again in the work at Salmon River Central School and elementary school and their high school and St. Regis Mohawk School up in the Akwesasne area, where I have an opportunity to work for some years, restorative justice practitioner as a community peacemaker. And just recognizing this notion of having circles before you need them, that oftentimes we'll do a lot of community building circles, and that oftentimes it's just getting used to that format of circles, that idea of circles. And it's recognizing also a reminder, this is a Haudenosaunee practice, and for this notion of being in circles, of having a talking piece, of speaking one at a time, to not speak over one another, and to come together as peacemakers, to come together with friendship and peace and doing this forever with peace, equity and equity and justice and righteousness. So some powerful notions. So just again, a reminder that for any of you doing circles, whether it's in your different organizations, if you're at a school, if you're in a community, if you're at a workplace, just a notion of having circles before you need them, where it can be community building circles, celebration circles, whatever that may be. An example I can think of this for my family growing up was one tradition that I love very much was that whoever's birthday it is, we'd always like if we went out to eat somewhere, usually at a restaurant or even if we're at our house, wherever we are, that whoever's birthday it is, that each person would go around. We just would kind of go invisible talking circle, just giving head gestures and head nods to let people know who's talking next. But whoever's birthday it is, everybody would say a memory, like a good, positive, loving memory about that person that they have with them. And just to watch people's faces light up and just to people meaning what they say, that I can't remember a lot of gifts, like physical material gifts I've gotten over the years. However, I can tell you like some of those words, just how I felt. I can tell you how I feel being with my family and being with my loved ones there, just feeling just so secured and loved and wrapped around with loving arms of that good medicine of those words. So I can tell you maybe in your own family, with your own friend group, your chosen family, something for a birthday or for a celebration, just an idea of just of a practice of putting your minds together and just saying what's important and having everybody have a chance to speak their mind as well too. Some notion I work with Victor Fisher has been doing this practice for many years and for mediation has essentially written the book for mediation in the state of New York in terms of best practices and teaching at Albany Law School. When doing circles with Duke, this is just one practice of talking about of when you're designing circles. And again, this is a proposed theory of components, and definitely matters for cultural alignment. What works best with you as your practitioner, what's most authentic to the place that you're serving, the community you're a part of. However, a general idea of who is the circle you're designing it for, what is the purpose, why are you doing it, where is this happening, when is it happening? There's these 5 C's that Duke had talked about, and there's this idea of convening. So usually I have a question to kind of bring people together, of kind of just checking. Oftentimes I'll even do what's the weather between your ears, or what's your phone battery percentage? Just something to let people know, like, how are we coming together here? Connecting oftentimes. This is particularly when you're doing something that's trying to address an issue. Be like, okay, how are you connected to this issue? And everybody recognizes that and it's not so much finger pointing or it's not so much blaming that first point. It's just recognizing, like, how are you connected to this? How does this issue concern you? What is this collaborative action we can take? And that closing, trying to put a bow on it, if you will, trying to have that cathartic notion of that last dance, so to speak, like the documentary of The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and the 90s Bulls, where they come together in a circle and Michael Jordan reads this poem at the end to kind of have this notion that he wasn't normally a poet, but he's doing this action of that recognizes this is very special for our time together. Like, so whatever that may be, whether that's a poetry, whether that's in a circle, a prompt I oftentimes will say after being in a circle with people is say, and I just want to say. So if anybody, I think right now you just want to say to everybody as we come here together, and oftentimes those are words of gratitude, oftentimes those are words of people just saying things that they still need to get off their chest, so to speak. So, and words from Duke as well too. Some of my people I've worked with before talks about this: right design, right piece, right story. So if you're using circles in your own design, having done this, if you're a restorative justice practitioner, if you're studying about it, if you want to implement it more as a lawyer and your alternative to mediation in different ways, with these court cases, over 90% of them that don't go to trial. So how are you going to bring healing? How are you going to address these things? So in doing so, for whatever you're doing it for, a human being using this practice, use it with my family, use it with friends or different things, recognizing it's the right design, right piece, in the right story you're sharing for the. Oftentimes, if you're modeling a response, oftentimes you can be the person that goes first. If you want to be vulnerable, if you want to be a long response or a short response, oftentimes just by sharing first, you can kind of set the tone of what that may look like. And just a reminder that you being vulnerable allows people to do the same, either consciously or subconsciously. It allows people to know, oh, this is a place where we can do that at. Okay, that's wonderful. Let us continue on. All right, some other things as we're here in week 6, and I want you to take away after taking this course, some neat things that I've learned as a practitioner of restorative justice or community peacemaking in Indigenous communities, is recognizing the spirit at the core of the practice. So I think that oftentimes, if the spirit gets taken out of it, it can feel like it's just an icebreaker, which is great. Time and a place for icebreakers, don't get me wrong. But I think that's like a different than also just being like this very like a spiritual practice, this soul-filled, the great mystery, those things, the words that you can't even articulate, some of the most important things in life, but just trying to not take that essence out of the practice as well too. As an example I'd give, as I've had some different professors in my life, Georgietta Sanchez, she's a Shumash and a Tohono O'odham elder and also a poet. And this notion of storytelling, right? Storytelling is this beautiful animated process. And I'd say what distinguishes that and what Georgiana Sanchez has taught me is that it's not just a repetition of facts, but there's spirit involved, there's the emotion involved, there's the animation that's involved as well too. So with that being said, for restorative practices, just recognizing that spirit at the core of the practice. And for me, I recognize for all the different restorative, all the different indigenous communities, how diverse and unique they are across Turtle Island and North and South America, how unique they are across Africa and different part, whether that's in Ireland or in Europe, or whether that's in parts of wherever it may be, Australia, New Zealand, different places for the different peoples, Maori in New Zealand and Aboriginal people in Australia, or whoever it may be doing these practices, as if they're like all different circles. For me, with the Venn diagram, the overlap in the middle is like the spirit. Like that to me is what the core of the practice is. And for any peoples, whether you're when the practice is at its best, in my own opinion, what my own belief, my own perspective, what I've experienced and what I've seen. Definitely emotion, authenticity, and listening is key. If you're just going through the motions, it can be tough. I know for me as a practitioner that I have to be very much present. I try to do things as opposed if I have availability to have like the visuals or questions either up like on a digital smartboard or either written on a smartboard. I just feel much more authentic to be present than I am if I'm looking at a piece of paper and like reading off a script. And some people do very well off a script and they feel like they're much more controlled and they're being very purposeful and intentional with every single word they say. So you really have to find what's best with you, and that comes with time and practice and trial and error. And that comes with shadowing other people as a co-facilitator, but you might have a lead facilitator and you work with someone as a co-facilitator to kind of watch them work and watch your own, then getting into your own style. And as I've heard it said, again, this is truer than true. There's no one more youer than you, in the words of Dr. Seuss. And it's so true, right? If I try to be like other people, I'm going to fail because I'm not them. I can take best practices. I can take best ideas. Like, okay, I like when they do that. I like when they do that. And this is me. This is how I practice, how I approach the practice as well. And that's when I'm at my best as a practitioner. So I'd encourage you to find your style, just to be yourself, be honest and be kind. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, whatever's going on. That when you're going to bed at night, when you're waking up in the morning, just oftentimes if you're dealing with heavy cases, it can be some pretty heavy. You just want to make sure that your own narrative, that your own self-talk is positive, is kind, is gentle, as if it can be very easy to take some of the storm, take some of the trauma, some of the mess, kind of take that home with you and take that in your dreams, so to speak, and give you nightmares if you're not careful, right? So it's very important to just be careful and to be kind to yourself and practice that self-care, especially really important when you're doing heavy cases, to take care of, to self-regulate, so that while you're going into those situations that you're already ready. I've heard it said, I remember asking different mediators who've done some of those practices similar in this regard, the notion just that important for self-regulation, that if you feel yourself like kind of like losing control, that in the moment, it's kind of too late. Obviously, that does happen. You have to do what you can with what you got. But trying to, before that you get to that point, trying to be so much at peace that you're not easily shaken, that you're self-regulated, you're able to be that center for peace for other people while being authentic and connecting with others as well too. So it's an art, it's a skill, it's a dance, it's a balancing act, and you can do it. And I believe in you. So just giving you some tools and some concrete things here as you're using this practice, or if you're seeing this practice being done. Just a reminder for restorative justice or community peacemaking as a tool for conferencing or addressing harms. This is from the University of San Diego Center for Restorative Justice. We've talked about 3 tiers, and we're talking about tier 2, restorative circles and RJ conferences. So when you're doing a conference, if you would ever do a conference, there's a number of different cases across Turtle Island, North America. Here, oftentimes referred to as North and South America. Here, I'm talking about North America. And when doing these circles, if you're going to do conferencing about addressing harm, it's so important you do pre-conferencing, where you're meeting with people individually. And we're working in a community where we did over 100 different pre-conferencing, where each interview was over an hour. We had 2 facilitators for each person, just because it was so important, and wanted to have like that space and control and peace. So this notion, it's important to know pre-conferencing where everyone is at, like just recognizing like what happened, what have you thought about when it was happening, what have you thought about since, like how do you feel about this, and knowing if people are people in a mindset of accountability. Do people want to move forward with this? Do people not want to talk about this? Where are people at? Do people not see that the harm they've caused? So here coaching can be used if the time window allows. So sometimes you might meet with someone multiple times. For instance, the first time, if they have no idea if someone caused serious harm, they're like, no, I can't imagine how that caused, no, I don't believe it. I can't see it. But okay. And just like trying to coach people through, but okay, well, can you imagine what this is like? Like, how would you feel if this was this? How would you feel if this is that? It can be different and be tough. Empathy, I feel it's like I've seen it as a spectrum for different people. Some people very, very attuned to this. Some people it's not as much. And so that coaching can be used to try to help people. I would say here's my precaution for you coaches out there. So not to force answers in pre-conferencing, as accountability is key so as not to cause more harm in the future. What I mean by this, I've done pre-conferencing in some cases, and I remember being like, okay, well, you didn't really mean to do that. Like you didn't really want to say that, right? Like that's not what you want to say. The person was kind of like shrugging it off, like whatever, like, so I'm like, okay, good. I've done good, done great. The person's in a great spot. Well, that's where I was wrong, and I was overconfident as I got into the situation, the conference, and that to try to adjust the harm. And the person who I thought I was kind of feeding the answers and pre-conferencing to make them think that I thought they were doing good. Once we got into the community together, they actually still were taking no accountability. They were doing more harm and more causing more pain and trauma. So I would not encourage that. So I would make sure, and I'm still continuously learning, but I would just say definitely pre-conferencing, just make sure you want to know ideally, generally, where people are at, what people are going to say. Once you get into that moment, once you get to that day, people can change once someone says something, once just that feeling of how it is. That being said, definitely do your best with what you can for pre-conferencing if you're going to do this, just recognizing the importance of such, just finding out where people are at and getting them an idea of telling people through as well too. So here's what to expect. So once we have this conference with everybody, this is the process as you can expect it to go. Here's how it is. Here's the expectations. Does this sound like something you want to be a part of? So getting the voluntarily people being a part of this as well too. So if you are to do like a circle and you're bringing people in, so this is one from a tip from Kate Prandis here. So if you're doing this tier 2, if the person who caused the harm ideally is the last person to enter the circle. So that being said, you wouldn't want the person who caused the harm to kind of be one of the first people or to be there, as those conversations that can kind of happen unregulated, or if you're not ready for it, it can. You just want to make sure that it's ready, like that the space you're designing is to hold those conversations. So you're just trying to control as best you can for any different instances or different remarks that may happen before the circle happens. So strongly recommend having a circle keeper with the person who caused the harm. So someone's like outside with the person who caused it, maybe kind of coaching them or just seeing where they're at. And one person's with the rest of the people, kind of like holding the circle, getting everyone seated where they're at in this circle. Again, teamwork makes the dream work, good communication, working together, staying on the same frequency, same vibration, working together. Example of a two-person circle team who practices today, comprised of one person from Israel, one person of Palestine, and it's this notion of this is a team who I know who are still like I don't know them personally, but I know other people in this field of restorative justice. We talk about these people and the work they've done, and just how people can come from different communities to try to hold conversations for peace. So going along here, this is in Michigan, and this is a courtroom. This is a non-Indigenous setting, but it's this notion where the courtroom has been changed into a circle using restorative practices, and this notion as well too. This as like a vent in the middle of the courtroom as well too for the fire that's in there. Is that just that how that can change the dynamic? Just having that in those just giving us nod and acknowledgement towards these ceremonial traditional ways as well too. For RJ as a tool for healing, just a reminder, this healing through intergenerational trauma, using intergenerational resiliency and strength. So not just buzzwords, but real things. Some lessons from my cousin, Eddie Cornelius Grosskopf, as we've talked about Eddie earlier in the semester as well too, with her practice of gentle directions for life. We talked about some of the themes, and I've learned my practice from Eddie and also from my grandmother growing up and from other people's, but especially from my own family, as I know it from an Oneida practice. And what Eddie has taught me is that TJ, we as Native people do not have a monopoly on trauma. Right? Everybody can deal with abuse, people can deal with addiction, and this is the tool to help people. So when we're doing this practice, TJ, we give people the gift of empathy, and you can change their life forever. To be able to see the world through someone else's eyes, you would change their life forever. So it's a reminder of that gift of empathy. I believe that's one of the big takeaways why we do the practice, what we do, is to see the world through somebody else's eyes. And I can think of a story really quick. One of my great uncles used to tell me just this idea of perspective, and there would be these there's a story where all these animals, and they were all together, and they were seeing this rabbit, and the rabbit kept taking this food and kind of gathering up. Looked like it was hoarding it. Looked like it was just taking a lot of food for itself and going away. And everyone talked about, wow, rabbit is just so selfish. Like rabbit is so selfish all the time. So selfish, rabbit. So then one day, like, you know what? Like us as animals, we're gonna go follow that rabbit to see what's going on. So they follow the rabbit, and then eventually they get to they see Rabbit where it's going back to, and Rabbit comes back to where its home is, and it's this huge family. And Rabbit essentially gives away everything that had taken, essentially has nothing hardly for itself. All the animals, they see it. Wow, Rabbit's not as greedy, as selfish as we thought they were. That they were just trying to help their family here as well too. So just this notion of empathy, being able to see the world through somebody else's eyes. For your week 6 videos, you can see these different notions of talking circles. You have Floyd talking about this Ojibwe talking circle and just this spiritual practice, and this native elder talking about it. So I encourage you to use your head and your heart space to check out that one. You can look at these Indigenous talking circles of the United Nations, shining a light on the importance of sacred plants. Legend Lake, using talking circles at these Menominee schools. The Sacramento Native American Health Center, using talking circles that address diabetes, addressing some heavy issues and heart issues. And Restorative Justice in Harmony with Indigenous Peoples, want to check it out as well too. Some optional videos if you want to further educate yourself on this notion of overrepresentation of Native people systemically. Here's some different videos talking about trauma-informed justice in Aboriginal populations, transforming the criminal justice system of Indigenous overrepresentation, Indigenous spirituality inside Oregon prisons, which is a powerful watch as well. And this here on APTN News, lawyer discusses why Indigenous youth are overrepresented in the correctional system. I want to share you with you this passage here. This is from a critical review of the Native American tradition of circle practices. This is a book chapter that I had published in 2021. And when it's and this is the passage I want to focus on. When talking circles are missing this Indigenous philosophical foundation. So when we call it talking circles, but really it's missing that philosophical, spiritual foundation. So here's a passage of me I wanted to share with y'all. I said, when talking circles are used without alignment to the community, the talking circle seems to yield completely different results, which is rejection by the participants. An example of the literature of particular interest was one where Native respondents from different tribes gave candid responses on their respective, quote, second wind program aimed at the cessation of smoking for Native American people through the use of talking circles. The responses were probably some of the most honest I've ever read in a research journal concerning a Western practice trying to take the place of an Indigenous one. I will allow the Native participant from this program to speak his words on the subject. So this is from that second wind research. It says, to culturalize the program to fit our Native American needs, including incorporating a talking circle, incorporating a self-help group, phone lines, and one of the biggest things I see is that this is so sterile. It's not culturally pleasing to me. Like with the 12-step program, they incorporated the 12 steps at a medicine wheel, and they gave every step a significance to our cultural identity. This, the second wind brochure, on the other hand, is just another government-issued pamphlet, and we've been inundated with them. I mean, they're given to us all the time. Focus groups and programs are always great starts, and they mean well for us as Native peoples. But the problem with that is when they're not culturalized and we can't relate to it, then I lose interest as the Native person. We have to tailor it. 2 things. That's oral history. Remember that our history is oral, so we're just used to blowing off anything in writing. And secondly is visual identity. Do you want to know what my opinion is? I think this gives lip service to Native Americans. I see nothing other than the title, which is a catchy title. I see a design. Other than that, I don't see anything mentioned in the talking circle. I see nothing adapted to natives. So this is looking at some research from 2006 as well too. And it is stating that the use of a talking circle without any of the cultural, philosophical, or spiritual connections to the practice could be argued as an example of cultural appropriation with talking circles. Cultural appropriation has the ability to occur with talking circles or traditional Indigenous practices when not done with the help, consultation, and insight of Indigenous peoples themselves. So that notion for respect and reverence, and also that notion to acknowledge, educate, and honor where these practices come from and what we're doing when we're talking about talking circles and restorative justice, and that it didn't just start in 1980 with Howard Zehr, and it started for millennia, thousands of years as well too, and still practiced today, not just historically, but I think that will be here and plans to be here for 7 generations to come or more. Talk about that notion of mass incarceration or overrepresentation of Native peoples in the current legal system. You look at this paper by Dr. Kimberly Robertson, Mass Incarceration Since 1492. And here's some artivism with Dr. Kimberly Robertson, using activism and art, putting together. This is in Los Angeles in front of the Walt Disney Orchestra Center, if I'm not mistaken. So looking at these different jail beds and just putting out some different data about the different overrepresentation of Native peoples. Also, we talk about healing from intergenerational trauma and talk about what is that trauma we're healing from. So this is an article looking at the Indian Health Service and the sterilization of Native American women. And as we look down here at the bottom of it here says the paper investigates the historical relationship between the Indian health services and Indian tribes, the right of the United States government to sterilize women, the government regulations pertaining to sterilization, the efforts of Indian health services to sterilize American Indian women, physicians' reasons for sterilizing American Indian women, and the consequences the sterilization had on the lives of a few of those women and their families. And it's estimated that, seeing here this Time magazine article, over the 6-year period that had followed the passage of the Family Planning Services and Population Research Act of 1970, physicians sterilized perhaps 25% of Native American women of childbearing age, and there is evidence suggesting the numbers were actually even higher. Some of these procedures were performed under pressure or duress or without the woman's knowledge or understanding. The law subsidized sterilization for patients who received their care through the Indian Health Service. For Medicaid patients, Black and Latina women were also targets of coercive sterilization in these years. So many women would be going in for an appendicitis or tonsillitis, and so while they were put under, then they'd be given a hysterectomy without their knowledge, and it'd only be years later that they'd find out that they weren't able to have kids, or sometimes people were told that their benefits would be withheld if they didn't sign things, which was not true, but they would be told and coerced this way, or people's documents were forged, or different things, or a number of different ways that was up through the 1970s that this forced sterilization was happening. So as we talk about this, sometimes it feels like people are just like, oh, just get over it. It's in the past, and this notion of that these things are still being healing from. And I think that's part of the damage can happen when there's this history that some people don't know about and that people are very real for other people. And I think that sometimes kind of the double whammy, so to speak, is when people do find out about it, people are like, oh, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. And people are like, oh, that's pretty painful. The forced sterilization of peoples against their will. Like, that's not ideal. Like, that would be the definition of genocide. So indeed, but if we look about these things as we acknowledge, educate, and honor, as we look to move forward as well too, even doing as we acknowledge here, the reason why I bring these things up is to talk about is that there's still room for healing. There's still healing to be done. And there's also recognize that all of us, it's not just Native issues, but it's all as United States history, as North American history, as world history about these things, and how do we treat each other as human beings? How do we learn from this to not make the same mistakes again? As I'm holding this eagle here, recognizing that the eagles are directly protected under 2 federal laws, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act and Migratory Bird Treaty Act. These laws generally prohibit the possession, use, and sale of eagle feathers and parts, as well as a number of other activities. However, under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there's possessions of eagle feathers and parts by Native Americans, and some passages from this talk about that all eagles essentially, they go to a repository that they're sent to that you can sign up for this, enrolled members of federally recognized tribes or may obtain a permit from services authorizing them to receive and possess eagle feathers and parts from the repository. So this is something that I've had as well too, and it's this protection for this legally as well too for these feathers and that federal law, and how important that is, the recognizing that the eagle feather is protected, as it's not just a feather, but this is part of American Indian Religious Freedom Act 1978. It's the bird that flies the highest. And I think for me, why I like to use an eagle feather or a feather for talking circles is it's not just some thing that I find off the ground to be like, oh, cool, like this is my talking piece, which again, cultural alignment, some people that works for different communities. For me, I think the whole key and the crux of the practice of talking circles, it's so important with an eagle feather is this is so sacred, as whoever's holding it cannot tell a lie. It has different spiritual properties as well too, that whoever's holding it would have the properties of and the vision of that eagle as well too. So one of the reasons why I know some different practitioners will use a plethora of different objects. I'm like, well, whenever possible, I would use an eagle feather or a wooden eagle feather sometimes if traveling or different things. But I think it's very, very important. I think the spiritual nature of the feather itself. Okay, one more active restorative justice I want to talk about is freeing Leonard Peltier. A documentary you can watch is called Incident Oglala. A book you can check out is called The Trial of Leonard Peltier. A request for pardon has been supported by late Nelson Mandela, late Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, hundreds more religious and human rights leaders asking for this, as Leonard Peltier since 1978 has been the longest prisoner in United States history. And if you want to, there's some more videos you can learn about this. A YouTube playlist I made called Free Leonard Peltier. You can look his his current legal representation is an ex-federal judge, Kevin Sharp, and calling for the Native leader to be freed. And you can look at a number of different videos and looking at Leonard Peltier tell this story himself as well too. So in jail for a crime which we know he did not do, from the Freedom of Information Act, that he's accused of a murder and the bullets did not match the gun. So we know it was not Leonard, and yet he still is in prison to this day. So I would encourage you all, if any of your lawyers out there, trial advocates out there, whoever you are out there, to try to make a change in the world, or people wanting some activism or change. This would be, I feel like it would be a big step. It's one person, but I feel like this was a recognition still by many different Native peoples across Turtle Island of what this means for justice towards Native peoples as well. Recognizing this nation-to-nation relationships is restorative justice and how important that is. It goes back to this notion for the Haudenosaunee for community peacemaking. In 1613, this two-row wampum belt called the Goswenta, and it's recognizing the water. White is the water, the purple is the ships, and one purple line is the Dutch ships, and one purple line is the Haudenosaunee canoes. And this notion that when they were first, there was a language barrier, and people eventually, after coming together and try to understand one another, that the Dutch had made this offer to the Haudenosaunee, like, we see ourselves like father and son, father to a son to you all, which the Haudenosaunee rejected and said, no, we see you all like a brother to a brother. We see you all like siblings. That's how we see you all. That like this notion of this two-row wampum, this Goswenta. If I was to hold this up, I'd be holding it from the right side, this wampum, and holding it down and recognizing and reading it to you all that this is there's enough room in the water for both of the ships to be able to go their own way without forcing the other person to be like the other person, or forcing them to take on their own ways as well too. So there's nation to nation recognition as well too. This peacemaking, and some of the fundamentals of this peace, this Goswenta, was this notion of friendship, of peace, and that this would last forever. That they would be having this silver covenant friendship, that they would be able to, the silver, because you could polish it, you could renew it ever continuously as well too, and remind one another of those covenant, of that promise between one another. Some optional videos on international restorative justice with tribal nations. You can look at some of those there. During COVID, South Korea providing 10,000 masks to Native American veterans. During COVID as well too, some Irish people had helped different tribal nations, being the Cherokee and the Choctaw and Navajo specifically, as during the potato famine, which was actually manufactured from colonization happening in England, that different people in Ireland who were very poor, that the Choctaw people heard about this and they sent over some funds, even though the Choctaw people did not have a whole lot of money when they're being pushed off their own traditional lands, different things. In doing so, the people in Ireland never forgot this. And if you ever go to Ireland, that there is this, at the bottom there, you can see the picture of it here. It's the kindred spirits, and it's this giant flower monument that's made, has of eagle feathers, or has feathers coming out of it, recognizing this, and how this nation to nation recognition of this. This was how Ireland had not forgotten this debt, to be able to support these different Native peoples who are in need as well too. Here's an example of the Haudenosaunee passport. I'm a Haudenosaunee passport holder. I'm also a U.S. passport holder. This is a notion from Rex Lions. Was when the team went and the Haudenosaunee lacrosse team, they'll compete as a sovereign nation. And at one point, they got to go compete in Ireland as well too. And this is just some words from Rex Lyons when he talked about, I want to express my deepest appreciation to the Irish and Team Ireland. It was the first time in the history of traveling on our Haudenosaunee passport that we were treated with such dignity and respect. Their custom officers met our entire delegation right as we stepped off the plane, escorted us through customs with all the necessary paperwork. We were in Ireland without any issues whatsoever. Once again, showing the world how we can all treat each other better and build stronger, healthy relationships when the effort is put forth. Nyamwa, Nyamwe, Nyawa, which is thank you, in Onondaga there. Thank you, Ireland. So just some different notions. The Haudenosaunee passport has been being used since 1923. In 2010, the Haudenosaunee team was denied entry to England. 2015, the Haudenosaunee hosts the World Indoor Lacrosse Championships in Onondaga. 2018, the Haudenosaunee team's delayed entry into Israel. 2020, Ireland gives up spot for Haudenosaunee to compete in Birmingham, Alabama. 2028, Rex envisions the Haudenosaunee holding the Olympic torch at opening ceremonies and competing as the Haudenosaunee under their own flag. So we will see, as they had already competed in Birmingham, Alabama, which is the World Games, which is a qualifying event for the Olympics. So would be an interesting idea for the Haudenosaunee. For many years, for millennia, lacrosse was used in lieu of going to war. So as opposed to going to war, the idea would play lacrosse, which may seem wild, but to me, I think it seems even more wild. Murdering one another to say that might makes right. I think that's how we solve problems in our world. For me, I think that's having sport an alternative, I think seems actually quite logical and reasonable. And it makes sense for me that Haudenosaunee have been doing using this medicine game as millennia in lieu of war as well too, for different to settle different issues and different things. Reminder, people, we're module 6, module 7 next week. Remember to do your 5 to 7 minutes recorded presentation. You can do this as a case study of a particular Indigenous nation and restorative justice practices, a similar different one from one covered in class. Comparative assessment of Indigenous restorative practices or a Western model, exploration of other core subjects and materials that relate to students' work and experience in other restorative justice courses or professional settings. So that will be based on clarity, coherence of the presentation, and extent to which the presentation embraces or at least advances one of the stated objectives for this course. And your one-page infographic of what you learned in this course. Again, what do you want to remember a decade from now? So what is that, a visual aid? Or if you're a wordsmith, what is a one-page memo you can remember, you can look at and remember, okay, I want to remember either this about the practice, about how to do the practice, whatever it may be, however it can be applicable to you in your own life. So that being said, a picture of me, my grandma, and my cousin Norma there. I just wanted to say to you, y'all want ko, gonna lunkwa nugiwa. Appreciate y'all very much. I put away my eagle feather here, my eagle feather box. Bring out my little four-legged, my little Mildred. I think she wanted to come say hi this whole time, my teaching assistant. Just living in peace with all the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds here on Mother Earth. Grateful for all the water, grateful for all the fish and the plants and the medicine plants, food plants. Grateful for our animals, for the trees, for the birds, for the four winds, for the grandfathers, the thunder beings, for our eldest grandmother, the moon, eldest brother, the sun, for the stars, for our enlightened teachers, the great creator. And if we left anything else out, it was not our intention to do so. We leave it up to each individual to give thanks in their own way. Thank you very much for everybody. Everyone, we will see you in our community peacemaking circle on GroupMe. I'll see you on Canvas and the modules. Reach out with any questions or concerns. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. I just want to say to you, Yalwanko Kadalunkwa Onuyiwa means thank you. I love you until next time in Oneida. And if nobody loves you, Dr. Reed's got love for you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, everybody. All the best.